Welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemuller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. On today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Fabian Bernal. Fabian, originally from Bogota, Colombia, is now the Vice President of Sustainable Modeling and Measuring at Dairy Management, Inc. in the U.S. He's been a seasoned dairy consultant, a sustainability professional throughout his career in the U.S. dairy industry for the last 20 years, and currently resides at his farm in Kentucky. Fabian's worked in animal nutrition, animal welfare, sustainability, physiology of lactating animals, and agribusiness throughout his career. So over the last 20 years, Fabian's gained a lot of comprehensive knowledge and experience with the challenges facing the livestock and specifically the dairy industry in the U.S. Fabian serves on the board of directors at the National Institute of Animal Agriculture. And he's somebody that I've admired through most of my dairy career. I've got the chance to know Fabian when I worked for a dairy co-op that we both worked for. He was a colleague of mine, and we became friends and stayed in touch ever since that time. Fabian Bernal, welcome to the AgCulture Podcast. It is so good to have you here today.
Thank you so much. What an honor.
Fabian, we've known each other for probably 13 or 14 years now, and you're somebody that I've always admired watching grow in your career. You know, we've been colleagues at one point in our careers and always stayed in touch, and I always saw you as a leader in the dairy industry in the U.S., no matter what position you've been in. And one thing I really admired about you is your entrepreneurial spirit that you bring, even though you've been working for different companies. You have the entrepreneurial spirit, and I want to dig into a little bit of how that came about later on in our conversations. But I really want to hear about your career story and dig into that a little bit more in this episode of AgCulture Podcast. So if you could start out by telling us your background and your upbringing and what really brought you to cows.
Well, Paul, first of all, thank you. This is an absolute pleasure to be in this podcast. And what brought me to cows? Well, all my life, I've been trying to understand more and more the one thing I knew, which was cows. It all started at home. My grandpa was a dairy farmer, very small farm. And through that process, I really got deeply into agriculture and everything surrounding the business of agriculture and specific to dairy. At the same time, everybody around me, from my father to my friends, everybody was deeply into science, biology, chemistry, environmental science, and so on. And so I wanted to apply what I was learning from my friends and the people around me to the things that I truly love, which was cows. And cows have been always there. So I want to see the world through the eyes of agriculture, through the eyes of farmers, through the eyes of cattle, and truly try to do my best to serve that industry. But I'm also in this constant process of learning. And how I learned to do so, or how am I doing that, is through people and getting to the best connections. And that's why you and I stay friends for so long. I've learned from you, and I learned from many farmers, and it's truly a pleasure to be with friends, with people that I have met along the way that has formed my career, starting very, very early with Grandpa and all others that were around there.
Well, that's a great beginning there. So now I want to really go into, you've really had three parts of your career, three stages of your career before the position that you're at today. One thing I forgot to mention in the intro there, you are currently the Vice President of Sustainability Modeling and Measuring for Dairy Marketing Incorporated, or DMI, in the US, correct?
That's correct. I work for DMI. I also spent some time at the Innovation Center for US Dairy. I am part of the scientific research team, and I do all the modeling and measurement looking at greenhouse gas emission neutrality to 2050, as well as other goals around water, environmental impact, and so on and so forth. So yes, that's my role today. But there were, as you mentioned, three specific stages of my career that led me to this point in my life. So I'd be more than happy to talk about those.
Yeah, let's start. Let's start out with what really bridged that gap between you growing up around agriculture, around people that were interested in biology and science, and where did that lead you to in your first step in your career?
So I was going to school back in Colombia. I'm from Colombia. I was raised in Colombia, and I came to the U.S. somewhere late 1999. And at that point, I met a veterinarian by name Dr. Brett. Dr. Jenks Brett was that person, that one person that saw a little bit of something in me, and gave me the chance, gave me the opportunity. So through a lot of discussions, he offered a scholarship to stay working with him, to do a lot of work at Western Kentucky University with him, but also to learn from his consulting services and how he apply all this scientific vision and the veterinarian science and the animal science into serving his clients at the time and servicing the industry himself. So I started deeply. My first stage started in milk quality and in efficiency, and getting deeply into understanding how do we improve from animal health to evaluating equipment to truly building trainings and execution of those trainings with employees at the farm level. And this small package that we created with Dr. Brett led to greater opportunities working for companies like Alltech and Dairy Farmers of America and many others, right? At the same time, I got the chance to travel with Jenks, and we went through Mexico, Canada, parts of South America, visiting farms and learning from those processes and learning from people, but also bringing a couple of things that were extremely important to each one of those farmers, which we focus tremendously in animal health and truly animal management, health and management. Then we also talk a lot about genetics in my travels during that time, but education and investment in human resources. That was a key component of that discussion back then. And that led to many travels, many farms, many miles driven, and a lot of learnings all through that process. That was the first stage.
Yeah, so that's great. So you had experience traveling around the world. How did that really shape you? I know you kind of had that as a theme throughout much of your career, but how did that shape you early on as you got started?
So the first thing that happened was as you start visiting other countries, and you are himself coming with the perspective of a third world country and production systems that are probably inadequate for these times, but you have this perspective, and all you want to do is to learn and see it and take the best notes possible. International travel, what led me to was to make somewhat of a comparisons among what works and what doesn't, depending on the environment in which you are, and that led to this feeling of having to understand what drives these farmers, what drives this business, what drives these families, and how they apply while they have tremendous constraints in their business development. And how can I bring information without destroying that, but also adding up and be additive to those businesses, additive to those systems and production systems and management systems. And truly the travels allow me to see the world from that perspective of each of those individuals and the challenges in each region. And for us, with Jenks at the time, I'm talking almost 20 years back, um, there was this great desire of bringing clear information and education to those involved in the process, with the ultimate goal of improving animal health, improving milk quality, and improving businesses from the center out, from deep in the organization out. That was what drive me then.
Did you ever, this is kind of maybe a rabbit trail, but have you had the experience when you were doing that, especially in the countries that were much less developed, that, man, they're just never going to catch up, or I don't know what I'm doing here, I can't help these people. Did you ever have that experience in any of your overseas travels?
Look, there was one trip that really changed my mind on how to approach, let's call it consulting, but also my vision to what dairy was at the time, because for most of my travels involved business development and businesses that were thriving in a way, or they were somewhat challenged, but they were healthy businesses, right? But one of my travels led me to a part of India in which these farmers were surviving from their few cows, right? And it wasn't a matter of business development, it was a matter of life. And at that point, how can I help to sustain life, to sustain your family as family is going hungry? At the time, there was a serious problems with a drought. The cattle didn't look great. And you sit and look at these cows and you look at this family and what can I do? What can I offer that changes their life, that doesn't have to, at that point, I couldn't do much for the cows and I couldn't do much for the family. And you start thinking about it deeply into your soul. What is it that you can do? And so at that moment, the best thing was to walk away and reorganize your strategy, right? And so we sit down, we look at the opportunities, we look at things, um, and at that moment, what was clearly valuable for this farmer was not the milk that was pretty much feeding his kids, but it was the manure. And then we started talking about, okay, let's don't focus on the dairy side. Let's collect this manure and maybe we can find a small way of businesses for you and thrive and maybe monetize what you consider waste, right? Especially in a moment in their lives that they had nothing, truly nothing. And so, yeah, that was one moment in my life that I had to stop and rethink. And that led me to always take those breaks in the planning, those moments in rethink and hear and listen to what's happening before you jump into conclusions or even into advice. That's probably the worst possible scenario. Listening and patience is what I have learned over all these years, traveling and visiting and learning from farmers. The number one thing is listening and be patient.
That's great perspective in that story, and that's one thing that, for myself included, you don't really open yourself up to that type of opportunity to rethink things unless you're outside of your comfort zone, unless you're outside of what you're familiar with. And I've learned so much and learned how to deal with people in different ways that think very differently than I do, mostly through those experiences of global travel and in areas that you might not necessarily be the most comfortable in, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And yeah, that part of my career where all of these things are happening, they truly forge a mentality of constant improvement, but also a mentality of service. And that's where I built upon for the second stage of my career, in which I started looking more at productivity and efficiency, and evaluating the critical areas that affect productivity at farm level. So I started looking more at the um, forages production, management of diets, but also management not only of the building the diet, but also delivering these diets to the animals. Starting to look at manure as an output, not as a waste and a byproduct. Then looking at the environment and how the environment affects the efficiency and the health of the animal. And I'm talking that microenvironment that we create at the farm level. Then looking at, again, health, animal health continues to be critical, but also animal care and practices in that area and protocols, and then all over control and planning, right? All that stage was very focused on understanding how all this micro environment that we have created for the animals and the diets and everything, what's the impact on productivity and efficiency. But it all was forged from these original farm visits and travels with Jenks and travels out and about, that led me to that process, with the results of looking at animal health, again, best management practices, genetics, nutrition, and again, people involved in the farm, from education to planning to resources associated to each one of those stages within the farm, and this process driven within the farm. I started to get better understanding and learning from those, and applying some practices and some critical components of performance. But more so, what I learned the most was how people reacted to the small things, how they reacted to changing small parts of their practices and gaining on top of those. And it all started by listening, understanding the problematic or the issues that they are looking at, and give 2 cents to what they probably already know, but it needed that last push, right? But it's always people. And in that process, I also got to learn and meet people from all over the world. And at that moment in time, in that second stage of my career, looking more at productivity and efficiency, I got to meet you, and I got to meet others, and I got to meet farmers. At the time, I remember counting. I was working with Dairy Farmers of America, and we had a tally of how many farms I had visited and how many cows. And by the end of 2.5 years, there was 1.6 million cows visited at the time. Over 13 countries visited at the moment. And I just had the most wonderful relationships. Farmers, industry leaders, companies, CEOs in different companies, looking at that moment, what's the next step in animal care? What is the next step on animal welfare? What is efficiency looks like? What is milk look like? What is milk quality involved in those and on all these processes? So it is the second stage in my career, and it built a really nice portfolio of friendships and influencers and um, great people that just helped me in this process.
One, I think knowing you in that stage, I saw you as somebody that was really a teacher. You were very good at helping people understand not only what was going on, what the importance of the protocols and things that they were doing management wise on the farm was, but also why it was important. And you really did a great job of serving others in that stage as well, from the perspective that I had being right alongside of you on some of those farms. So that's kind of my initial memory of you of really being a teacher and seeing you just so energetic and excited to teach people about cows and about how to do better and improve. And that was one of the things that really stuck with me.
Paul, one of the things was I wasn't trying as much as teaching. I was gathering teaching moments and I was just transferring that information where I thought it could apply. And in that process, in many opportunities, I was successful and some not so successful. And I had to redo and reapply and rethink about it. But at the center of it was always the farmer and the cow. And as long as I was doing the right thing for the cow and the right thing for the business and the family and the farmer, I walk away with this peaceful mind that I have tried. Um, and that led me to the next piece of my career, the third stage. And as I'm thinking of farmers and I'm thinking of animal health and I'm thinking of these environmental processes, I started looking at how do you plan and how do you grow? How do you have a sustainable growth? So this business that may start with 10 cows or 1,200 or 5,000 cows, how do you grow this business? How is a business become sustainable? And how do we implement strategies to continue growth? Is that growth through more cows? Or is that growth to other businesses or through better milk or more milk? So in that place, I started looking at evaluations that deal with technical evaluations of the facility and the economics of the farm. Then we started looking at capacity for marketing, along other things like um, labor. Is there enough available labor so we can continue to expand? What are the constraints from the financial feasibility of the company? Is the animals at the stage or the type of animal that we have at the stage in which we can continue this process of growing, or do we have to relook or reassess the economics and the genetics of these animals? Do we have any restrictions, CAFOs and environmental restrictions and other regulations? Do we have pressures by consumers? Do we have community, the local community putting pressure into this growth process for the farm? So I started evaluating how from an early age of milk quality following into efficiency and productivity, how do we grow and what are the challenges around that? And that led me to again, starting in the their animal health, the their best management, the genetics and planning those genetics and those forecasted production systems, diversification of businesses. Then we start looking at that moment of environmental impact, but always goes back to the same selection: human resources, education, and people. Always back to the same point, and of course the cow, right? So those have maintained through all my career. Those two, the cow and the people and education, are being always there. But then I'm starting to implement these other challenges, and I'm starting to look for answers, and those answers I could not find um, by looking into books. I had to look at people, and I had to learn from CEOs, and I had to learn from farmers, and farmers that were at a increased growth and a pace of growth that is never seen before in the industry, to other farmers that are looking at precision dairy and high technology and what they are thinking, how do they incorporate all these new things into the business, looking at planning and growth, but a sustainable growth. And that was a really interesting part of my career. Then I landed into a company that we most know at Laval, and we started to look deeply into technology and uh, let's call it precision dairy. And at that moment in time, precision dairy led me to other discussions and other pieces and other travels in which I got to see the largest robotic dairy in the world in Chile, to travel to see some of the most interesting farms in China, to Germany. But it's always this desire to come back to the US and work with the farmers, those friends that I built, the U.S. farm that that got me truly back back in the road here in the U.S.
Touching on that last stage there of the traveling that you did around technology innovation, what were some of the differences when you traveled around at that point and the people that you worked with in that stage of your career? What were some of the differences that you saw there versus when you originally started in your career early on and were traveling? I mean, there are probably different people that you're working with, different levels of business that you're interacting with. What did that look like?
Well, I tell you two things that were really critical and that I found to be a huge change in between my first stage in my career to this third that I'm talking. And it was data management. In the early days, everything was, paper and some record keeping here and there. Most of all the records were based on your check and what you were paid for. And your record keepings were mostly around breeding and your payments. And that was pretty much it. A little bit on the nutrition side. Then towards the end of that third stage of my career, data is driving the business. I mean, data coming from different places and trying to understand what this data is telling us. Because data is just numbers and it's there, but what is that is telling us? Is it telling us a forecast, or is telling us a trend, or is telling us a problem, or is telling us a falsehood because the data may have too many errors in it? And spending time on data analysis and spending time on these models and understanding what is it that is telling us was the greatest change. And so, for example, at the first part of my career, I was talking about milking routines and milking procedures. And I was literally with a clock, clocking people. In the later stage, I have a whole software looking at machine performance and looking at people performance and cameras tracing some of these things. And I'm thinking, I'm totally obsolete by now, right?
Well, that's why you developed in your career, right?
Exactly. I had to evolve with the career, but it was so wonderful to see. And in these travels, I also got to see how people uses data. And one of the most interesting people I saw was a German farmer, small, probably about 75, 80 cow, but he was famous for having the best genetics in the region, absolutely the best. And I came to the discussion with the fella, and he pulled records on his cattle breeding dating to 1920. Every single one, and all digitalized.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, holy moly, this is fully digitalized with these branches and all these genetics, which half of it went way over my head, to be 100% honest. But but how this moment in time, people has taken advantage of those technological advancements. I remember my grandpa with little pieces of paper saying, "This is the bull, this is the cow, and the baby turned red. We don't know why," right? And the calf is, three-legged. I don't know why. and I remember those things, and I'm sitting there with this fairly small farmer, known for his genetics, and then the light bulb goes. Is this consistency? Is this love for the business, and truly a story to be learned from. And likewise, you get to see others. I remember there's a great friend of mine and a farmer here in Ohio, close to me, that he came and started a small farm. Very soon, he had 1,200 cows, then added a second facility and went against everybody's advice and put his older cows in the brand new facility on a bigger stall. And he was looking at cows and genetics and his data systems, and data told him, do not put your younger herd in the new barn. Let's put the older ones there and extend their productivity and be more efficient for them. And he went against it, but the data was driving that decision. And later on, he ended up also processing milk and so on and so forth. But it is so beautiful to see these processes and seeing the maturing of the industry in a matter that is incredible.
So you've mentioned through every stage, people and cows, right? That's kind of been the consistent thread, right? What in your mind have you enjoyed working the most with, and what are some of the challenges working with both people and cows that you've experienced in all three of those stages?
Probably the greatest challenge is me staying up to date, because farmers move faster than science, and science moves slower than the best data possible available. And so catching up to the farmers with data and science that may be behind just slightly, I was always, and I'm still always behind. And this constant drive for knowledge and understanding is the greatest challenge, because I cannot keep up with farmers. Farmers are too smart. They know their business better than anyone. They are moving faster than anybody else. And so in some occasions nowadays, I do some farm visits in which I spend more time learning than providing any service. And that himself is been a greatest challenge. In the early years, of course, I had a major issue with, I guess, making myself understood. Not only the language issue and the and the I guess the accent, but also this mentality of we can do better and we must do better. And when you're young, you make too many mistakes. You open your mouth way too fast, and that was another challenge of mistake. And over time, the solution was just that patience and learning to listen. And again, just staying up to farmers is just extremely difficult. Farmers go way faster than we expect. Actually, I in some of the analytics that I do nowadays, I do believe that my premise might be slightly behind or behind, and that drives my interest into continuous improvement of models, continuous improvement of data, continuously talking to farmers, because I want to get as close as possible, knowing that I will be behind.
You just went through the three previous stages of your career that kind of led you up to where you are today. Did you feel like those three things prepared you for the position you're in, or is it the position you're in today completely different than what you expected to be at in this stage of your career?
What happened was that during these last, let's call it 12 to 13 years of my career, and I mentioned it before in the podcast, that the environmental CAFOs and environmental pressures become another challenge within the industry, right? And as we're starting to grow and we're looking at these growth models from the smaller versions of farms growing into the small versions of the same farm, but still growing to big farms, I found myself looking more and more at these environmental challenges and CAFOs and other things. And the world of sustainability came to be very, very interesting to me. At the first part of that, it was just a desire to understand environmental impact. But then the social economics started to make sense. And in my mind, all the things that I learned from the cow, from the nutrition, from the people, it all fit finally into one scenario, which was the sustainability scenario. And I started to think about this more and more. And when we talk about sustainability and we talk about the environmental side, the social side, and the economics, they can't live all separate. They have to unite and be a correlation in between them. And in those connections between economics and the environment, between the environment and the social and the environment, all those connections in there in the center is where I started to find answers to what farmers and processors do to supply this great product, but also to remain in business. And I found myself that I can finally put everything together under one umbrella. And so I decided this is the place to study this. So got again, studying and questioning myself. Am I going in the right direction? And I got to meet a wonderful, wonderful person, um, deep into sustainability from the UK. And Dr. Johnson at the time basically said, pursue this because very few are thinking from your point of view from the farm forward, right? Where most of us are looking from industry down and you're looking from farm up. And so pursue it, connect it, and look through it, right? So in that process for the last 12 years, I've been truly starting to apply, really between 12 and 14. But then I wanted to understand, okay, since we have learned all I can, and there's much more, of course, but there's a lot I wanted to learn, how to put all together. So there was an opportunity to start looking again at environmental impact, productivity, growth, society, and all these things. And this opportunity at Dairy Management Incorporated came about where I can actually apply and create these models and build upon other models that are already there, but look at it from the point of view of the farm and how do we clarify what is possible, what can happen with what we know today, but more so to determine what's the gap in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, for example. What is the gap? What if what we know today can get us to a place, how much more do we need to do to get us farther down, maybe to neutrality or even negative in some cases? So this fourth stage of my career is put all together in the service of clarification of what can be done in terms of environmental impact, social, and economics. Of course, right now I'm fully committed to the environmental side and the evaluation of models and decarbonization scenarios and greenhouse gas emissions. Why? Because is the challenge at the time, and the best way to address this is again through cows, through people, technology, um, education, and of course at the very 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 center of all is innovation, and that happens at farm as much as in other companies. But I do believe that farmers are the driving entity in innovation at farm level. Again, I'm always going to be behind, and that's the desire to learn more and more from all of you, all the farmers out there.
One thing I want to just touch on again that you mentioned is that you're looking at things from the farm up rather than from industry down. And I think that's an important point to make of the unique opportunity that you have and how so few people in the industry are doing that today. And I think that's one of the things we might have lost along the way, that perspective, because as we get further and further away from the farm, more and more industry people that are involved in the industry don't have that experience like you do, like I do. And it's such an important part, I think, that made the industry what it is today originally, that we really need to look for more opportunities, maybe as farmers ourselves, and become leaders and be involved some form or fashion to educate industry people, whether we're going to do it full time off the farm or just to have somebody from industry on your farm to educate them and give them some firsthand experience, because that's such an important point of perspective that has, as we get further away from the farm, people get further away from the farm, they lose.
Let me tell you something, Paul. Just about 11 years ago, I made one of my dreams come true, which was buying a small farm and farm. And so I bought this little farm in Kentucky alongside with my wife and daughters. And
that's where the accent comes from, right?
Yeah. and and I tell you what, one of the decisions very early, once we were planning and doing our strategic planning for that process of purchasing this land, was to commit to sustainable practices, whatever that meant at the time, right? And to make as much as possible of the things that I was studying apply at a farm level. I wanted to see if in fact some of these practices can be applied in a way that is economically viable. At the same time, I had the same thought visiting with farmers, and especially farmers that let me, let's say it colloquially, maybe playing with some of the things at their farm. But the intention has always been, can this be suitable and could this apply at farm level, right? And is there both benefits, financial benefits as well as environmental benefits, or is one higher than the other, right? And how do we make the decisions? If the cost too much but the environmental impact may not be there, why even try? But if they come to balance and it gets better, well, things are starting to pan out, right? And so this small farm is what I try to apply those things that I'm preaching. So that's one of the things that I'm very proud of is working, still working the dirt, still working with animals on my time. So when I come and I get questioned about, is this even feasible? I could come from experience, my personal experience, but also the scientific support of all around me in the MI and other places, and have somewhat of a concrete answer. All to say, all through this process, I have found that sustainability has a maturity path. And in that maturity path, if we don't follow this path, and we can talk about this later in the podcast, but if we don't follow these steps and this path of maturity, what you end up is with resistance, and you slip down into your maturity, and you end up with more resistance. And all along the way, you have to create value, and value for the farmer, value for the customer, value for the end user. And without that value creation and taking a step by step in the maturity process, all what happens is a slip back and a lot of resistance to the whole thing, right? To the whole sustainability umbrella. So it is very important. It's something I'm really deep into it right now. It's something that is driving my decisions, is driving my processes, and is driving what I'm hoping to produce as a service to the farmers and to the industry as I move forward here in the MI.
Oh, that's some great insight that I really appreciate you bringing to the episode here. So one thing I want to touch on, going back to your career, what advice would you give somebody that wants to strategically build a career in agribusiness? I mean, you look like you had a great plan laid out. You had it step by step. It just fell right into place, right?
No, not at all. It all happened. It all happened almost by chance, but also I don't believe truly in luck. I believe in getting prepared, because you have to identify your opportunities. So it wasn't, well, I have to say I'm somewhat lucky, a lucky man. But I've been trying to prepare myself and be able to identify opportunities. But ultimately, in my path, in my best advice is to have a mentor and to listen to those that are around you. listening is super important. I can't tell you, Paul, how much I have spent in reflecting on the early mistakes. And the early ones were mostly when I jumped the gun, right? And so I'm a mentor that you can trust is super important. Listening and being able to identify opportunities when they happen. Um, but there is one thing that I always had all in my mind. I love cows. I love the business of dairying, and in my mind, I wanted to do the best possible for the cow and for the farmer, no matter where I was or which job I was. Of course, within the dairy industry, I wanted it to do the best possible for that cow and for that family and for that farmer. Um, Always, that was focus one, and the rest was just this strategic vision of looking for opportunities, understanding the opportunities, take onto opportunities when they show up, and always relying on mentors, relying on friends and people as you work forward. There's no other way, I don't think.
In that career that you've had so far, those 4 different stages, being in the 4th now, had you had an opportunity or a challenge that you felt like you had to take a big risk at a certain point in time, and what walk us through what process you used to evaluate that risk?
Paul, probably the greatest risk for me was to leave the on-farm the on-farm advisory role and moving more into a data-driven environmental assessments, a process that is more of this computer-based database analytics, and breaking from what I'm most comfortable with into an area that I'm not really that comfortable, which is sitting down. I just can't sit down very long. That process was super difficult. And it's been a challenge, a tremendous challenge, because in my mind, when I'm looking at technologies, trying to understand the possibilities within different practices and technologies, my brain always goes to the farm. And sometimes I tend to disregard some science and some documentation. And it's been super difficult, but also a learning process to stop and reframe myself and rethink how to approach these challenges and this information and this data. And again, when I'm looking at this data, what is it telling me? Is it telling me a trend, or is it telling me a fact? And so this has probably been the greatest challenge so far. And the way I have confront my personal challenges is to breathe and to sit down and look back at this information and don't lose sight of what's important, which in my eyes, again, farmers and cows, right? But I must say, it's not an easy process. It's understanding a whole new process, apply that to what I love the most, which is the application on farm, the true application, and be able to translate that back into the scientific vision for sustainability within the dairy industry. And the path forward is nothing but a great lift. But I'm really glad to do it. I'm really happy to do it.
Well, great. I appreciate you opening up into that question there. I didn't prepare you for that one, so appreciate that. Before we finish up here, I know you talked a lot about mentors and interacting and connecting with people. That's one of the biggest ways that you learn continually. Are there any other resources that that you would recommend for somebody that's looking at developing their career in agribusiness or looking at starting their own enterprise?
Well, I think the number one place to learn is at the farm and with farmers. And I have the opportunity and I have the grace to meet some of the most entrepreneurial farmers in the world, and spending time with farmers has been nothing but a learning. I think that's an underutilized resource. I think we should spend more time with farmers. We should provide more of those scenarios where we can sit down and just talk over a cup of coffee and talk, because is great. Yeah, there is a lot of information out there today. There is a lot of education that you can do through online, through podcasting, through many others. But creating these scenarios where we can heard straight from the farmer's voice, if we want to truly get into what's possible, we need their voice. And so that's a resource that I always use. I knock on farmers' doors often. I ask their opinion. Um, I utilize a lot of information from great companies out there, as well as research done by universities and many others. But there is this resource, this online resource, that you can get to learn a lot. And yeah, I find podcasting, I find YouTubing, I find blogs by different farmers extremely telling of where the technology, where are we going, and how are we going to share this information. And this is the case that I'm so glad to be here.
Well, great. Fabian, I really appreciate you sharing your story of your career and really digging into it and how it has shaped who you are and what you're doing to add value to the industry. And you do add value to the industry, and I've really appreciated that about you ever since I've gotten to know you. So thanks so much for being here on the AgCulture Podcast.
Thank you, Paul. This was fantastic. I love it. I have listened to many of the episodes. Love the podcast.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Fabian. Take care.
Thank you, Paul.